M14 is an American battle rifle and America's choice for a service rifle when NATO would standardize the 7.62 by 51mm cartridge. Designed to be an upgrade to the M1 Garand and replace 4 different weapons, the M14 would have the second shortest service history as the standard issue service rifle with the United States military, while simultaneously remaining in service longer than any other infantry rifle. With a history that starts before the M1 Garand, the M14 is one of the most interesting rifles America has developed, so let's talk about it. Before the M1 Garand, the groundwork and development that would become the 7.62 by 51 caliber was happening because the 30-06 was proving to be difficult to adapt to a semi-auto platform because the United States wanted a less powerful round to allow for a lighter firing mechanism on their new rifle. Fortunately for them, however, Canadian engineer John C. Garand would thug that shit out and create the M1 Garand in 1934, making a reliable semi-auto 30-06 with it entering service in 1936. The Garand would go on and be the service rifle of the United States till 1957, with General George S. Patton writing a letter to Springfield Armory in 1945 stating that the Garand was the greatest battle implement ever devised. Even with its amazing track record and high praise, towards the end of World War II, modifications were being considered for the Garand, with the two biggest modifications being a detachable box mag to replace the 8-round end-block clip, and the ability to shoot in fully automatic fire. Because of this, alternatives were offered to replace the M1 Garand after World War II, with the previously mentioned John C. Garand submitting the most popular alternative, the T-20, becoming the base for all of their prototypes to come out of Springfield Armory. And for context, the T-20 was literally just a Garand that could take bar mags and could go full auto, with it being only slightly heavier than the bar. So from 1945 to the 1950s, Springfield Armory would make variants of the T-20, with the two most important variants to this story being the T-25 that was later changed to the T-47, and the T-44. Both of these rifles would go on to compete at the competitive service rifle competition conducted by the Infantry Board at Fort Benning, Georgia, going up against the T-48, which was a variant of the FAL. Almost immediately, the T-47 was dropped from the competition due to poor performance in dust and cold weather tests, officially being dropped in 1953. After this, the T-44 and the T-48 would compete neck and neck, with the T-48 being slightly better, with it being easier to field strip, being more dust resistant, and having been in development for longer. This was about to change when the rifles were going to compete in the winter rifle trials from 1953 to 1954. Anxious about losing the contract, the engineers at Springfield Armory spent the weeks leading up to the trials preparing and modifying the T-44 for the winter environment, while the T-48 got no preparations for the weather. So when the testing started, the T-48's gas system was getting really sluggish in the prolonged exposure, so the FN engineers tried opening up the gas ports in hopes to get the rifles to work correctly. Instead, it caused early and violent extractions along with broken parts, making the T-44 the winner of the winter trials. After this, in 1954, the T-44 would receive actual funding and would no longer be manufactured on a shoestring budget, meaning they can make some more modifications and reduce the weight of the rifle. With the final round of testing in 1956 against the improved T-48, the T-44 would win the contract over it being lighter, having simpler parts, and having a self-compensating gas system, being adopted in 1957 as the M14. So Springfield starts building new tooling lines to build more M14s in 1958 and start replacement of the M1 Garand in 1959. But with a lot of production delays, the 101st Airborne were the only Army unit to replace all their Garands at the end of 1960. This was only the start of problems. As I mentioned in the intro, the M14 was designed to replace 4 different weapons, specifically the M1 Garand, the M3 Grease Gun, the M1 Carbine, and the BAR. This decision was to simplify logistics so that you only need to worry about the one type of ammunition and everybody having the same parts for repairs and maintenance. The problem with that is that the M14 couldn't be a multi-tool for all 4 roles, with a 1962 report from the Department of Defense stating that the M14 was completely inferior to the Garand. Then the Vietnam War starts, and the M14 was having even worse problems with its length and weight being a challenge to maneuver in the thick brush of the jungle, combined with the heavy moisture of the jungle, and the wood bodies on the M14 would swell and expand, causing them to lose accuracy. With the added cherry on top being the insanely high recoil from a combination of the high fire rate and the power of the 7.62 cartridge, making the rifle uncontrollable in full auto fire and easy to overheat, making it a challenge to maintain fire superiority over the AK in Vietnam. No, seriously, this thing was really uncontrollable in full auto fire. Just look at this. After only 10 years of service, the M14 was replaced by the M16 as the standard issue service rifle of the United States in 1967, and of course it was a controversial replacement. In 1964, the M16 was ordered to replace the M14 by then Secretary of Defense Robert McNamara, bypassing the objections of Army generals. To get around this problem, in late 1967, the Army designated the M16 as the Standard A and the M14 as the Limited Standard, with the M14 being the training rifle for Army basic training and troops stationed in Europe till about the 1970s. And just because I want to re-emphasize, the M14 had 10 years of service as the standard issue service rifle for the US military, making it the second shortest service rifle behind the Springfield Model 1892 to 1999, which had a service history of 9 years, being replaced by the M1903 Springfield. So after this, the M14 was phased out as the standard issue rifle and would be moved into a sniper role, with the Army converting thousands of M14s into M21 sniper weapon systems until 1988 with the adoption of the M24 sniper weapon systems. Even after the M21 system was dropped by the Army, the M14 would still be in service in multiple branches, with the Marine Corps upgrading their M14s into DMRs in 1989, calling them the Marine Corps DMR, with the intended purpose of special reaction teams, fleet anti-terrorism security companies, and Marine Scout snipers in cases where a semi-automatic rifle would be more appropriate than a bolt-action rifle. The Army would also reissue thousands of M14s for use in Iraq and Afghanistan as DMRs after a 2009 study found that over half of engagements were over distances of 300 meters where the M4 and M16 were considered ineffective. And if I had to guess, this study most likely contributed to the later adoption of the SIG MCX Spear. Inside Special Forces groups, the M14 also maintains a designated marksman role, with SEAL teams using both the M25 sniper weapon systems and the Mark 14 enhanced battle rifle, with Delta Force also using M14 sniper variants, with it being deployed during the infamous Black Hawk Down incident during the Battle of Mogadishu, where Sergeant First Class Randy Sugar used an M14 for sniping from helicopters to provide fire support to ground troops. Outside of frontline combat, the M14 is in use by the US Navy as they are issued to sailors going out on watch while in port to back up alert forces, and also it is used to shoot a large rubber projectile to another ship when underway to start lines over for alongside refueling and replenishment. I don't know why they do this, I'm sure there's a better way to do this, but I'm not in the Navy, so I wouldn't know. With the last major use of the M14 in service with the 1st Battalion of the 3rd United States Infantry Regiment, aka the Old Guard, in the Military District of Washington, being the sole remaining regular US Army combat field unit where the M14 is still standard issue. Because the Old Guard is primarily tasked with ceremonial services, and the M14 is one of 3 rifles chosen for the 3 volleys salute. With all of these reasons being why the M14 has remained in service longer than any other infantry rifle at 69 years old, beating out the M1903 Springfield's 67 years of service. Outside of military service, the M14 is depicted as a semi-auto DMR with it almost never being capable of full auto fire, sometimes being mistaken for the M21 or the civilian M1A, with one of its most famous depictions in film being the movie Full Metal Jacket, where it is featured prominently in the Marine Corps boot camp scenes, and it is the rifle that Private Pyle ends up shooting his drill instructor with. Moving out of movies and into video games, if you know about the M14, you most likely know about its long-standing rivalry with the Olympia and the famous Call of Duty Zombies game mode as to which one is the better wall buy. And we all know it's the M14, you can't convince me otherwise. With the strangest depiction of the M14 being the SRSS Bulldog conversion kit being added to Battlefield 4 and the Dragon's Teeth DLC, and even though the Bulldog is missing its auto-selector, it is still capable of full auto-fire with it being designated as an assault rifle in-game. And that was the history of the M14, a battle rifle that wasn't meant to be, that tried and failed to replace 4 guns at once and ended up as a reliable DMR that is somehow still in service trying to redeem itself. But hey, I'm H. Consider subscribing.